my name is Momo. English. My English is not good. I'm sorry.
Sitting down in the basement pissing in Mountain Dew bottles. You're too lazy to get up and go to the toilet.
Well, you never pissed in a bottle because you don't want to get out of bed?
No, I piss in the fucking...
You just pissed your bed, right?
No, I piss in the bathtub.
Yeah, it's episode 93 of this particular radio program. Anybody that's been in contact with me lately probably knows that I've been in a pretty despondent and foul mood. So coming at you live from whatever particular hellhole I find myself to be domiciled in, this is going to be a Godflesh episode.
Oh no.
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 No. Oh God no.
Because when I'm feeling particularly misanthropic, I go on full bore into the world of industrial shit, and specifically Godflesh.
And then at the end he kills himself.
So if y'all out there don't know what Godflesh is perhaps the most well-known project of one Justin Broderick, who was initially famous for being in a very early incarnation of Napalm Death, who of course were like one of the first grindcore and death metal bands. He played on side A of their first album, Scum, but before that he was in a band called The Fall of Because, who were actually named after a Killing Joke song, and in fact, Godflesh's main project is essentially an extension of Joy Division and Killing Joke and all those kind of weird post-punk bands taken into a more metal direction. So if y'all don't know what Killing Joke sounds like, here you go. I think Metallica covered them. So they influenced a weird and wide variety of bands, because obviously Metallica sort of invented thrash metal, but at the same time they influenced a ton of the goth rock stuff, and a lot of Godflesh is drawn heavily from Killing Joke. So you have very despondent, echoey vocals, mechanical sounding production. What happens when you take all that kind of stuff, those sort of floaty guitar riffs, and run them through the mind of somebody who is equal parts influenced by Celtic Frost and Throbbing Gristle? You get one of the most downtrodden, nasty-sounding, misanthropic albums of all time, that being Streetcleaner, the 1989 Godflesh debut. So you have the guitars sort of alternating between these very chuggy riffs and then odd floating dissonance, perhaps presaging some of the black metal stuff that come out of Norway. I know they were into Godflesh. The bass almost becomes the lead melodic instrument because the guitars are floating around so much. That's something that comes out of Joy Division, but then is taken from the realm of interpersonal relationship turmoil into larger overall disgust with existence, pretty much. Something that I'm sure we all can relate to. At least I sure can. The fact that it's a drum machine isn't a limitation of the music. It's actually very important for it to be this mathematically precise. In fact, they play versions of this song that just go on forever and ever with that drum beat, like live versions, 10, 20 minutes long, them just kind of dancing around that very simple type shit. Good stuff. Later on, after that album came out, it basically changed the world. It was a massive influence on tons of bands. But Godflesh kept going after that, and they started doing interesting stuff on their later albums. I think that a lot of the post-Streetcleaner Godflesh is overlooked, particularly by a lot of metalheads out there, because they've got pretty riff-heavy stuff like this. This one's the single off of their second album, Pure. It's entitled Mothra, which, as an avid kaiju enthusiast, I am completely down with. Got that repetitive drum beat, but instead of just ambient stuff, they play straight up guitar riffs over it. It actually reminds me a bit of something that Mitch Harris might do on the third and fourth Napalm Death album, the sort of mechanical, bendy, winding, grooving riff. In addition to that, they also did some pretty interesting, more introspective, kind of ambient stuff. This one's off their third album, Selfless. It's entitled Black-Boned Angel. And I think actually there's a post-metal band named themselves after this song. I'm not too huge into post-metal outside of Yesu, which of course would be the semi-continuation of Godflesh, done by Justin Broderick. To get those very Killing Joke-esque clean vocals, and these very heavy riffs that are playing these drifting, sort of unresolved chords over the cheese grater bass from Mr. G.C. Green. I like that kind of stuff when they do it a lot too. Godflesh influenced a whole plethora of bands. There's the very obvious industrial metal bands like Meathook Seed. Yeah, this kind of shit wouldn't have happened without Godflesh. This is actually a side project of a later Napalm Death guitarist after Justin Broderick left. This is Mitch Harris, influenced by Godflesh and his own kind of cool industrial shit. I like it, but besides all the industrial bands and all of the post-metal bands that were clearly spawned by Godflesh, you have that influence cropping up in a lot of death metal. This is the second Gorefest album entitled False. This song is called Get a Life. And that very heavy bass, coupled with the mechanical sounding drum beats that Ed Warby has chosen to use, and then these drifting chords, clearly point to quite a bit of Godflesh being spun in these guys' collective CD players. Maybe they're still using tapes when this album came out, like 1992. Fuck. It's old, but it's very good. You can also hear other death metal bands using, like, Obituary, especially on the, what's the name of that album that had I Really Don't Care on it? Fucking World Demise had a lot of Godflesh on it. You can hear it in the black metal realm, too. This is Batyushka, a band I cannot seem to shut the fuck up about. I guess I must like them or something. But here we have these drifting, jangly guitar riffs, pulsating bass, and once again, very mechanistic drums. Clearly denotes quite a bit of Godflesh going on here. This is from the 2015 album, the original real Batyushka album. I've gone into the drama behind that band more than enough, but also Bluthaus Nord clearly has a lot of Godflesh to them, Mysticum, a whole bunch of different bands like that. But interestingly, Justin Broderick himself has said Godflesh doesn't sell that well in his native Britain and in most of Europe compared to how it sells over in the US. He says he makes most of his money in the US, and I'm wondering if that has something to do with the philosophy behind the band kind of resonating quite a bit with an American audience whose culture has become considerably more desiccated than even the rather moribund state of European identity at this point in time. In fact, Brett Stevens himself had a lot to say about... What the hell is this? Where is this sound coming from? What the fuck is that?
진짜 저번에 해외 꼭 그렇게 가고 싶다 했는데 같이 못 가가지고.
Why in the hell did you install a Brett Stevens alarm? I mean, you know how often I'm gonna end up setting that fucking thing off? Anyways, Brett Stevens saw Godflesh as sort of a nascent rebellion of people who did not enjoy living in this spiritually dead world, kind of utilizing the technology of that world against it. He described Streetcleaner in particular as an unrecoiling stare into the morbid sewage of human souls and resounding determination to succeed beyond that karmic feedback loop, which then propels its conceptual delivery into believable spaces of transcendent music. Hello? But yeah, I think given how mired America is in this sort of soullessness that we find ourselves, it makes sense that Godflesh would be pretty big over here, even more so than in Europe. Later on, Godflesh got into some really interesting stuff. He even did some albums that later on he ended up sort of disowning them, saying he didn't like them that much. However, Us and Them, I think that's like the 5th Godflesh album? 4th or 5th, maybe the 6th, fuck, I don't know. He put out a shit ton of albums and like EPs and splits and whatnot, but Us and Them incorporated even more electronic music influences, not just sort of industrial throbbing gristle shit, but stuff from breakbeat, a little bit of a AFX in there. and did some really cool stuff with it. It might be my favorite Godflesh album. Kind of jungly drum and bass shit, but watch what he does with it. The heavy component of the music is GC Green's bendy bass, and then the guitar is sort of playing these almost shoegazy chords with a whole lot of delay on them and very clean tone. Very interesting stuff. Strange deconstruction of metal, but don't worry, it ends up getting heavy. Jesus Christ, that sounded like a Chaos AD riff straight out of Sepultura. These overblown, distorted vocals. A whole lot of just different weird components that have been woven together in a very minimalist manner to make some interesting music. And then the counterpoint to that thunderous riff is more winding melodies and the bass just going all kinds of nuts over these weird fucking drum beats. There's like multiple drum machines going at once. Really, really dig this album. Apparently, Justin wasn't happy with the work he did on it, but later on, after Godflesh got back together, I want to say in like 2009, 2010 or something, their first album was very much a return to Streetcleaner roots, but with 8-string guitars for added heaviness. But that second post-reunion Godflesh album might have brought back some of that us and them style experimentation, which a lot of people were really upset about. I, for one, enjoy it. Check out the first riff off that album. I'll be damned if that almost doesn't sound like a really minimalist black metal riff or something, you know? That string bend, very Darkthrone-esque. And as we mentioned earlier, Celtic Frost is a big influence on Godflesh, and you can even hear black metal bands in the 90s using that same kind of riff. Check it out, it's one of my favorite highly underrated Norwegian black metal bands, Tullus, doing a very similar kind of riff, but Godflesh didn't end up taking it in that direction as you might have guessed. Oh yeah, brought back the hip-hop drum machine. It's a really cool riff right there. Then he ends up doing a very us and them thing to it. More of those drifting guitars. Definitely still very distorted and strange. This album's quite a bit angrier than Us and Them was. That was kind of a little drony thing at the air, again, somewhat reminiscent of black metal. I think it's more of a convergent evolution thing, though. I don't know how much black metal he listens to outside of like Bathory and Celtic Frost. This kind of heaviness is very surprising if you listen to some of the later Yesu albums, his post-Godflesh project in the early 2000s. They got very light, but then when he came back with Godflesh, opposite direction, back to very, very, very heavy. I think of the two post-reunion albums, I personally prefer this one. It's called Post-Self, but the other one, A World Lit Only by Fire, is also cool. Maybe he does listen to black metal. That's a fucking black metal-ass bar chord riff. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, that's basic overview what the hell Godflesh is about. Yesu, I like their first few albums. They got a little fluffy for me later on. I'm glad Godflesh is back. And you know what? I'll see you around, everybody.
I want my name to be Spaghetti. Alright, Spaghetti. Whatever, I don't care. Just do what I tell you. The hell you looking at? I'm your father, I just made you. I got you a father right here. I got your daddy.
And don't forget, Jay, every Friday a bunch of fatzos all get together in a large room and eat unlimited amounts of fried fish and french fries. It's called a fish fry!